So here we go. So take a look at your table as I go through each of these. So I'm looking at milk, that's our first food, and let's talk about our test results. Now, here's how I would recommend you filling out your table. I would put either an X or a negative symbol if the test is negative. And for a positive test result, I would either put a check mark or I would put a positive or a plus sign symbol there. So let's go through each of these. All right, so let's look at the green test tube, which we tested for glucose. And if I look at my sheet, a reddish brown color indicates that glucose is present. Right? Certainly want to practice good lab safety techniques here. So you can see that that test tube is not reddish brown in color. So we're going to say that that test is negative for glucose. So if you want to either put a minus sign or put an X in that box for glucose. The next test we did was for starch, and we put some iodine in there, and we are looking for a bluish black color. And again, do not see any blue or black there. So we would say that that is a negative test result for starch. The next test, we tested for proteins in our blue test tube, and a positive test result here, we're looking for a pink or purple color. And I don't know if you guys can see that, but I would say that that is a positive test result, right? That is, I'm saying that's definitely a pinkish, maybe a slight purple color there. And so that would indicate a positive test result for proteins. So you should put a check mark or a plus sign for protein. The last test we did was the brown paper bag test. And what I'm looking for here, it should look, when I hold it up to the light, on the back side of it, it should be translucent, which means I should be able to see light passing through. And now I know you guys can't see this at home, but it is definitely translucent in the spot where I put the milk and let it dry. So we're going to say that that is a positive test result for lipids as well. So looking at milk, glucose we said was negative, starch was negative, protein was positive, and lipids were positive. All right, so we're done with milk. Now we're going to move on to potato chips, and let me get that set up, and I'll be right back. All right, so here we go. So let's look at our test results for potato chips. All right, so our first test was glucose, and remember, we're looking for a reddish brown color. That would indicate that glucose is present. I'll show you guys this test tube up close. Okay. I would say that is a negative test result for glucose. It is not red or brown. Okay, the next test that we did was for starches, and we should be looking for a bluish black color. Ooh, that's a good positive right there. Right, and I noticed that as soon as I dropped the iodine and it hit that potato chip, it started turning black. And then when I mixed it up with the water, right, it started turning a little bit lighter blue color. But I would say that is a positive test result for starches. Okay, the next test we did was for proteins, and we're looking for a pink or purple color. And I would say we do not have pink or purple. So we're going to say that is a negative test for proteins. The last test we did was the lipid test. And I want to show you guys this because this one's a little bit more obvious than the milk one. I don't really even need to hold this up to the light. I want to show you. Well, you really can't see that, can you? No. Well, if you were here in person, you would notice that there's a pretty good size like stain on there, and it is very, very translucent. When I hold it up to the light, I can see a lot of light passing through. So we're going to say that is a positive test for lipids. All right. Next, we're going to be looking at our Sprite. So let me get that test set up, and I'll be right back. All right, so let's talk about our results. And my glucose test is still working over there, so I'm gonna let that hang out, and I'm gonna skip the glucose, and I'm gonna start with the starch test. So I'm looking at my table, looking at that second column, right? So we're testing for starch in our yellow test tube, and I'm looking for a bluish or black color. I'm gonna hold that up to the camera. That is not blue or black. It's got a little bit of yellow, kind of a brownish tint. That's just from the color of the iodine. So I would say that that is a negative test result for starch. Remember, you are indicating a negative test result by either using a negative or minus sign, or you could just simply put an X in that box, whichever one you prefer. Okay, looking at my protein test, right? So this is my blue test tube, and I'm looking for a pink or purple color. And that is almost still perfectly clear. It's got maybe a slight bluish tint to it just from the Biuret solution, but that would indicate a negative test result for proteins. Hopefully you can see that on camera. Okay, looking at my lipids, all right, I'll hold that up to the light. And I would say that that is a negative test result for lipids. It is not very translucent. Maybe the paper is still just a little bit wet, but when I compare it to the milk and to the potato chips, it is significantly lighter. And I would say there's really not much translucence going on there. So that would indicate a negative test result for proteins. Now that our glucose test over here has had a little time to cook, we have a definite color change, right? You can clearly see that that is a kind of a brownish orange color for our glucose test. And I would say that that is very much a positive test result. So we're going to say, going back to our table, we're going to say that Sprite is positive for glucose, negative for starches, negative for proteins, and negative for lipids. All right, so that just leaves one last food item to test, and we will be done with this portion of the lab. So sit tight. Let me get set up with our egg whites. All right, so let's see how we did. Okay, now we definitely got a color change on our glucose test. And I don't want you to confuse the glucose test with the protein test. And we've got some really good pictures that we're going to splice in for this one specifically. So if I look at my green test tube checking for glucose, and I'm looking for a reddish brown color. Okay, that is a very purple color, and I think what we're seeing there is just the color of the solution mixing with there's a little bit of egg yolk in there, so it's kind of got a yellow tint to it, but that is definitely not red or brown in color. So we're going to say that is a negative test result for glucose. So again, I'm on the egg whites. That's the last row in your table. So we're going to say the glucose test was negative. Moving on to our starch test in our yellow test tube. So we're looking for blue or black. And I think that's a pretty clear negative test result for starch in our egg whites. The next test that we did was for the presence of protein. Now, for our protein test, a positive test result is going to be pink or purple. And hopefully you can see that in the camera. It's a little faint, but here live in person, that is, I would say that is a very purple color. So that we're going to say that that is positive for proteins. That's a positive test result. And the last test, we did our paper bag, our brown paper bag. Hold that up to the light. Again, the bag's still slightly wet like when we did the Sprite test, so a little bit of light is passing through, but not near to the point of our potato chips or our milk. So we're going to say that that is a negative test result for lipids. So let me recap those for egg whites. Egg whites, we said glucose was negative, starch negative, protein was positive, right? We got that nice kind of pinkish purple color. And then for our lipid test, we said that is a negative test result. All right, so real quick, I just wanted to recap our test results. So I'm just going to go through this table, food item by food item. So go ahead and check your answers as I go through this. Okay, so the first food item that we tested was milk, and we said that the glucose test for milk was negative. The starch test for milk was negative. Protein was positive, and lipids were positive. So you should have a negative, negative, positive, positive for milk. The next food item we looked at was potato chips. Potato chips, we said we got a negative glucose test result, a positive starch test result, negative for proteins, and positive for lipids. So we went negative, positive, negative, positive across the row for potato chips. The third food item we tested, Sprite. We said our glucose test for Sprite was positive, starch was negative, protein negative, lipids negative. So looking at that Sprite row, the only positive test result we had was glucose, everything else was negative. And then lastly, egg whites. Egg whites were negative for glucose, negative for starch, positive for proteins, and negative for lipids. So make sure you go back through and look at your table and make sure your test results match.